Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're embarking on a genuinely fascinating journey, one that bridges the gap between ancient human psychology and epic, sweeping Asian art. We are going to decode one of the most compelling antagonists in all of human history. Now, you might think of him as a demon, a god, or maybe a monster, but the truth is actually far more intimate and honestly a whole lot more interesting. We're going to explore exactly how an ancient, quiet, internal struggle totally transformed into a blockbuster cosmic war. So I want to start off by posing this question to you. Who or what is the absolute ultimate enemy of awakening? When a person is just sitting alone, trying to reach ultimate clarity, what is the biggest threat they face? Now, when you picture the enemy of enlightenment, you might instinctively imagine a literal terrifying monster with fangs and claws. But as we'll see, the answer provided by ancient Buddhist texts isn't a physical beast at all. It's something way more relatable. It's something every single one of us battles on a daily basis. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today's biography of an idea. First, we'll meet Mara, the Tempter. Then, we'll explore his epic inner battle, face his three daughters, watch the myth get bigger, and finally track the evolution of this demon in art. Let's start with Section 1, Meet Mara the Tempter. This is where we define the ultimate antagonist. To really wrap our heads around this figure, we've got to recognize that Mara is a highly complex concept. He's not just a single guy with a pitchfork. Across early texts, scholars actually identify 4 distinct versions of Mara. You have Mara as a literal deity, as death itself, and as worldly existence, which represents the entire cycle of rebirth. But today we're going to zero in on this third concept, defilements. This is the Mara of our inner temptations and flaws. And that brings us to a very specific term, Kila Samara. Basically, this is the allegorical personification of temptation, moral conflict, sloth, and human doubt. Early on, Mara was essentially just a metaphor for our own psychological roadblocks. Think about it. When you sit down to work and suddenly feel this overwhelming urge to doom scroll on your phone, take a nap, or you start thinking, man, I'm just not good enough to do this. Well, that is Mara. He's literally the voice of self-doubt. Moving right along to Section 2, the epic inner battle. It's time to face the armies of the mind. So, in ancient texts like the Padahana Sutta, the Buddha's quiet meditation is framed as this fierce, monumental conflict. When he sits under the Bodhi tree, Mara attacks, but he doesn't attack with swords. He attacks with his 10 armies. And look at what these are: sensual desire, boredom, hunger, craving, sloth, cowardice, uncertainty, malice, fame, and self-praise. These armies are exactly the mundane procrastinations we all fight. The absolute genius of the ancient writers was turning a sudden, random urge for a snack into a literal attacking squadron. So how exactly does the Buddha respond to these psychological armies? With absolute unwavering resolve. The text gives us this phenomenal quote: "I will smash them with wisdom like a stone a clay pot." I mean, what a powerful, badass image, right? He isn't fighting back with violence. He's fighting back with wisdom and self-awareness. Simply recognizing the distractions for what they are is the very stone that shatters the clay pot of illusion. Which brings us to Section 3, the 3 daughters. Get ready for the next wave of distraction. Now, when Mara's direct assault of fear and physical discomfort totally fails, he flips the script. He changes tactics completely. He sends in his 3 daughters, and their names translate directly to the traps they represent. Tanha is craving, Arati is boredom, and Raga is lust. Their primary tactic? Seduction. The thinking here is, if you can't be bullied out of your focus, maybe you can be lured out of it, or just worn down by sheer apathy. They perfectly represent the more subtle, insidious ways our minds try to derail our focus. But yet again, the Buddha is just completely unfazed. He dismisses these illusions with sharp, unshakable logic. The text gives us this incredible rebuttal. "Fools, you have tried to split a rock by poking it with lily stalks, or chew iron with your teeth." It's such a beautiful way of saying that once a mind is truly settled and focused, tempting it with fleeting desires is about as useless as trying to break a boulder with a flower. The psychology here is just deeply profound. All right. On to Section 4, the myth gets bigger. We're going from an inner voice to a literal cosmic war. As the centuries rolled by, later storytellers took this quiet, internal struggle and, well, They completely dramatized it for the masses. One of the most fascinating developments is this bizarre paradox found in early texts like Ashvaghosha's Buddha Karita. Get this, Mara was actually equated with Kamadeva, the Indian god of love. Yes, you heard that right. The ultimate antagonist was depicted as a handsome, Cupid-like deity shooting arrows made of flowers. The whole idea was that earthly desire is the strongest tether keeping us from ultimate freedom.
But let's be real, flower arrows don't exactly make for a blockbuster action climax, do they? So the myth rapidly escalated. When seduction fails, Mara gets desperate. He summons a terrifying army of animal-faced monsters. He hurls rain. He hurls fire. He literally causes earthquakes. Finally, he demands to know what right the Buddha has to sit there. The Buddha simply touches the ground, calling the earth as his witness. The earth shakes, and Mara's cosmic armies scatter. We've officially gone from a metaphor for bad habits to a cinematic Marvel-level event.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 5, Evolution of a Demon. Let's trace Mara in art.
So, how did artists across Asia actually translate these wildly vivid texts into stone and paint? Well, when we track his visual depictions across 3 major eras, we can see this physical mutation unfold right before our eyes. We'll look at the incredibly early art of Sanchi and Amaravati around the 1st century BC, then the Gandharan art of the early centuries AD, and finally the absolute explosion of forms from the 11th to the 18th centuries across Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Tibet. Starting off with Sanchi and Amaravati way back in the 1st century BC, early Buddhist art was aniconic. That means they didn't physically show the Buddha. They represented him only by an empty throne. But surprisingly, Mara is depicted as this handsome, majestic god who looks like royalty, while his army looks completely grotesque. This perfectly mirrors that early textual idea of Mara as the god of desire, leading this chaotic mob of our worst impulses against the quiet emptiness of enlightenment. Now, jump forward with me to Gandharan art. This is where history gets incredibly cool. Because of Alexander the Great's conquests, this region had massive Greek influence. As a result, cross-cultural pollination literally shaped the mythology in stone. Mara starts being depicted like the Greek god Eros, complete with a bow. And at the exact same time, artists start showing the Buddha in human form, specifically in the famous earth-touching posture, or Bhumi Sparshamudra. That pivotal moment of calling the earth to witness becomes the definitive visual shorthand for defeating Mara. As Buddhism spread further across Asia, this demonic mutation kind of reached its final form. By the 11th century in Sri Lanka, Mara is still a retreating god, but by the 18th century in Thailand, he has fully transformed into a fierce, fanged demon. And over in Tibet, the imagery evolves into figures like Yamataka, this multi-armed, intensely terrifying monster. Over the centuries, Mara morphed to match the psychological weight of the fear and doubt he represented. He literally became the monster we feel on the inside. Which brings us to a final question, something I really want to leave you to chew on. What shape does Mara take in your own mind? We've just traced a 2,500-year-old history, from a quiet metaphor for laziness and doubt to a handsome god of love, right up to a multi-armed cosmic terror. But at its core, the story remains about the inner battle we all face when we try to do something truly meaningful. Does your Mara look like procrastination? Does it look like imposter syndrome? Or does it look like a distraction you just can't seem to shake? Whatever it is, remember the wisdom of this ancient explainer. You have the power to smash those doubts like a clay pot. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer, and I'll see you next time.